One of the raids that never really leave me, even though it's so many years later. It was in early 1945. We were told that the Allied Navy wanted us to sink a ship that was in harbor in Yugoslavia, and the name of the place in those days was Fiume, and they said they're going to put on larger guns and we'll be a sitting duck for them. It's got to be sunk at all costs. And so our boffins, they said, we'll send 4-engine bombers from high up so they won't be in danger and they can sink it. But they couldn't. But something went wrong and they never hit the ship. So they then called my commanding officer, Don Tilley, one of the most famous South African pilots who had won the Distinguished Flying Cross twice in Malta. And some people say that he did more to save the North African campaign than any other pilot, because he sunk one of the ships carrying the fuel that Rommel desperately needed to supply them with the fuel they needed for their tanks, and that they couldn't get down as far as Alexandria without that fuel. Well, he was reported to have sunk that ship. So they called Don Tilley in, and they said, we think the only way to do it would be to use you Beaufighters. Can you devise a plan whereby it will not be a suicide raid? He said, give me and my navigators a little time to think about it, and we'll let you know. 4 of us were selected. Don was going to lead it. I was going to be his number 2, because I was known to be the most experienced pilot in the squadron and knew how to keep very, very close formation and had a good record of firing rockets. But before we did that, how were we going to get there without them knowing that we were there? We would come over at a place called Zara, and we'd fly over high up in the air so that all the Nazi air gunners from Fiume area would think, oh, they're not coming here. They've already passed us. They must be going to some interior place. When we got about 100 miles over the coast, we cut our engines and we dived down very fast. And if anybody had been looking, they probably thought, there's a target there that they're going to attack. But when we got down to about 20 feet above the trees, we turned sharp north, northeast possibly a little, and went into a valley. And we followed that valley for about 70 miles, maybe a little longer. And then there was another valley turning to the left. And we knew from our map reading, that's the one we want. And as we went along at ground level, we saw that the valley was ending and there was an escarpment in front of us. And we thought, from careful navigating and flying, that we would reach the SS Kuckuck if we then pulled up with full throttles and went 1,000 feet above the escarpment and dived down. Hopefully we should have the SS Kuckuck in front of us. But it wasn't to be, because as we got up, turned our noses down and saw the ship, it wasn't there. It was slightly to the right. And so now we were in trouble. Don was okay because he was leading. I wasn't okay because I was just behind him. I had to pull my throttles back. Number 3 and number 4 were not in quite such close formation as I was, because I was the one who was supposed to be right on top of Don. So I switched on my cameras, which I could do manually, or it could be done by firing my 20mm shells, which were powerful for keeping the heads down of anti-aircraft gunners, or it would go off automatically as soon as I pressed another switch, which was one for my 8 rockets, which were under the wings. So I pressed the one without having to fire rockets, fire cannons. And so the photo that you see shows that Don's Tilley's rockets hit that ship, the SS Kuckuck, in exactly the right place, which should be just immediately under the waterline, which it was. In the meantime, I was juggling to get into the right position and get my speed at 220 knots right, a virtually impossible task. And then, as I was coming in, a little lower than Don, I found that if I didn't lift my left wing, it would hit a crane and I would be a downer anyway. So I lifted my port wing and fired my rockets. But they didn't hit where they should have hit, where Don's did hit. I think they probably helped in destroying the engines and lots of other things, but unfortunately they didn't hit the fuel tanks. It would have been a winner for me if I'd hit the fuel tanks and they'd burst into flame. So I went back home that day, very, very disappointed that I had not done what I would like to have done. When we had attacked that ship and were breaking away, by the time I got through, just after dawn, 88mm guns, anti-aircraft, were firing hard. They were firing all right. How number 2, number 3, and 4 got through, and none of us was even hit, was an absolute miracle. And I claim it to be because my parents were claiming the 91st Psalm for me 3 times a day. We then started forming up when we got out of the range of the 88 mil. And when we had got into fairly close formation again, not desperately close, but quite close, the sea in front of us opened up. We had been detected by radio-controlled 105 millimeter shells, and they nearly got us, although we were very far out to sea. Unfortunately for us, they hit the sea immediately in front of our noses, and the sea just opened up as though it was some tropical storm or something, like a water spout almost. So we escaped. Don Tilley, being a Malta man, never went home at high level. He went home at low level, almost touching the sea. He was so used to enemy raiders, he never got out of that habit. And the senior officers, mainly RAF ones, were watching their watches, looking at their watches, and they said to themselves, they should have hit the target by now. They should be on their way home by now. We'll give them another couple of minutes and we'll call them up. And they called them up. But because we were flying so low, they couldn't get through to us. And we didn't climb up until we got right back to the airfield. And we climbed up to come into land one after the other. They couldn't believe their eyes to see that on this suicide raid, as they called it, not in front of us, but that's what it was called, that we not only all got back, but not one of us had been hit. So that became known as a tremendous feat, and of course the Allied Navy were over the moon at what we had done. So Don then went back to the headquarters to report what we had done. And they said, when they looked at the evidence, which I had provided with my photograph, they awarded him the immediate award of the Distinguished Service Order. Almost unheard of. That tells you, I think, the whole story.